Eloheinu melech haolam asher anu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. La'asok b'divrei Torah means to be engaged in the words or the study or the things of Torah.
Could you say that slower, Rabbi?
La'asok b'divrei Torah.
Thank you.
Okay. So if you, in the future, you want to also have a text, it's in the Tanakh. It's the book of Samuel, Samuel 1 that we'll be looking at. But I wanted, before we get into the women and everything, I think we need to look at King David and David as he was. And if we believe in genetics and character, inherited character, I want us to look at who David was, where he came from, who were some of he's most well known for the 2 women ancestresses in his lineage. Yeah, Penina?
We're talking about Ruth? His great-grandmother?
I'm going to show the text and then we'll talk about it.
Okay.
So we're going to look at the text. I'm going to share David. Where did David come from? So I call it David, the backstory. And did I share? Oh, I didn't share. This didn't work. Right. Hold on. I have to do share first. Share screen. And now I do David, the backstory. Share. And as Penina was mentioning, one side of David's family came from Ruth. Now we all know the story of Ruth, or do we know the story of Ruth? And so can somebody just tell me who was Ruth? Who was Ruth?
She was a Moabitess, and thank you, dear. She was a daughter-in-law, and she laid next to Boaz, but she gleaned from Boaz left in the field for her to glean, and he married her. They were married, and she's a great-grandmother of King David.
That is beautiful. So the thing that we want to look at about Ruth that I think is interesting, first of all, she was not Jewish. She converted. She's our most famous convert, as we know. And she seduced her husband. Her mother-in-law, Naomi, said, go to him while he's at the harvest and basically get in bed with him and have sex with him. And so, she was younger than he, so he was very flattered and whatever, and he fell in love with her and he married her. So there's a sexuality, because King David was a very sexual guy. And here's on one side, this sexuality that we want to look at. And so let's just look, let me move this up, hold on. To also, there are a lot of women in the story of David. The women are very important, even in his birth and his background. So who would like to read the first 2 paragraphs? Who would like to read? I can't see you all on this grid for some reason. So please say I will. Oh, wait, here I go.
I'd love to, if it's okay.
Well, let's have, who said that?
Donna.
Okay, but you just spoke, so I'd like to hear from somebody else.
Okay, you got it.
Stacy, why don't you read? You're muted, Stacy.
Okay. Naomi gains a son. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer.
Okay, I just want to stop. A guardian redeemer would be a relative who marries you after you become a widow. It's not about God or anything. A redeemer is someone who says, I'm the closest relative. Actually, there was somebody between them, but that guy gave up his right to marry Ruth. So it was Boaz. They were related. And so are you lucky that you had this handsome, rich man to quote unquote redeem you? Keep going.
May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age.
Okay, I just want to say, this is all about Naomi, not about Ruth. That's her mother-in-law. the women are friends with Naomi. They're talking to Naomi. So this mother-in-law and her Jewish lineage, they're saying, oh, you're so lucky because now you have a son-in-law, a new son who will take care of you. But it's all about the grandmother and the mother. Keep going.
Okay. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth.
Okay, now I want you to remember that number 7 sons. Keep that in your head, 7 sons, because that's going to come back again. Okay, keep going. Let's Stacy.
Okay. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David.
Okay, I'm going to stop share for a minute. I'm curious, and please, women in the sisterhood, I'd love to hear your opinion too. Why does they say Naomi has a son? Isn't Ruth the mother? Why do they say Naomi has a son? Does anybody have any opinion about that?
Maybe because,
Oh, Ruth, go ahead, Ruth.
I was going to say maybe because Naomi was the Jewish grandmother in the family, and Ruth, in fact, wasn't.
And also, what did she lose at the beginning of the story?
Her own son.
Her own sons. So she had no heritage at all. Penina, were you going to say the same thing or something else? You're muted.
Yeah, also it reminds me when Sarah couldn't have any more children, she took Hagar.
Right.
And made Abraham do this. It's like she's the promoter. It's kind of like, as a mother-in-law, she was, I guess her authority was greater in that particular story. And she's the one who promoted her to go to Boaz. She's the one who gave her all this idea. It's the whole idea is she didn't have any grandchildren from both her sons. So
through here.
Ahead to continue the lineage.
Continue the lineage. And
she's the one who promoted this whole thing. Let's put it this way.
This whole Ruth story is about the women. I mean, the women are in the beginning, the women are all through it. It's a very female story. Okay, so we have Ruth being the great grandmother, or is it hold on, share screen. Where is David? Share screen, share, go back. What happened? Yeah. So it was Ovid was the father of, her son was Ovid. He was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the grandchild. And David was the great grandchild of Ruth. So on one side, we have Ruth. Okay, but there's another side. And this is a pretty interesting side with some pretty well-known people besides that comes down to David. So the genealogy of David, who would like to read that? Who would like to read that? Merle, why don't you read? You're muted.
Okay, where are we?
The genealogy of David.
Oh, the genealogy of David. This then is the family of Perez. Perez was the father of Herzon. Herzon the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. Amminadab the father of Nakshon. Nakshon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz. Boaz the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse.
Oh, sorry.
And I can't get, okay. And Jesse the father of David.
Okay, so let's go. I'm going to stop the share. Does anybody know who Perez was? You do know. Okay. Do we remember? Where's Risa? Are you still there? Risa?
Remember.
Who's Perez? Do you know?
Yes, Judah and Tamar.
Oh, wait, that's Susan. Where are you?
Yeah, I lost my internet connection, so I'm going to try and get the video again. I was thrown in.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Who is Perez?
What?
Who is Perez?
He was the son of the union between Tamar and Judah.
Okay, correct. Now, if we remember, Judah was one of the sons of Jacob. He had 12 sons, right? Judah had 3 sons of his own, and his oldest son was married to a woman named Tamar, and the son died. Then he married him to his second son, Onan, and he died. So then he had one more son, and Judah said, go home and I'll call you. Don't call me, I'll call you. And basically never married Tamar to his third son because she was like a widow maker. He probably thought she had a curse or whatever. So she was basically a woman with nowhere. She wasn't a widow. She went home, but she couldn't marry anyone else because she was betrothed to this third son. And she was like an aguna, basically, a chained woman. So Tamar dresses herself up as a prostitute, stands by the side of the road, and as Judah comes by, he's very attracted to her. His wife had died, and he says, let's have sex. And she says, well, what he thinks she's a cultish Canaanite prostitute. He doesn't think she's Jewish. We don't even know if she's Jewish because there were no Jews. It was one family. So she was a Canaanite woman. She had a veil on or whatever. And she said, well, what will you give me? And he said, well, I'll give you my staff and my seal for now as collateral. Then I'll go where I'm going and I'll send back money. So she said, fine. They had sex. He gave her the seal and his staff, which is like giving your ID. Basically, it was biblical ID. And when they came back to collect, she had disappeared. So he lost his ID and his staff. A few months later, the elders come to Judah and say, your daughter-in-law is a harlot. She's pregnant. She's not married. She never married your son. She should be burned to death. Whoa. So Tamar doesn't say anything, but she sends the staff and the seal to Judah and says, the father of my child is the owner of these things, at which point he realizes it's him. And that he says, actually, I pulled up the text, and Judah recognized him and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son. And he did not sleep with her again. Okay. When the time came for Tamar, the harlot, the non-Canaanite, non-Jewish woman, fake harlot, to give birth, there were twins in her womb, and she was giving birth. One of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and put it on his wrist. This one came out first, but he drew back and the brother came out, and she said, so this is how you have broken out. And he was named Perez. So Perez is on King David's father's side, is the son of the Canaanite woman who slept with her father-in-law in order to get pregnant. So again, sex. My point is there's sex on both sides, non-Jewish women on both sides. And then, is there another name that's pretty famous in the heritage? The name Nakshon. Who was Nakshon? Does anybody remember? Risa.
He stepped into the Red Sea.
Wait, it's Risa. I'm sorry. Risa, go ahead.
He's the one that supposedly stepped into the Red Sea when they were crossing over, and they got to the edge of the water and nobody would walk in. He walked in until his shoulders were covered, and then the water parted and the Israelites could go across.
Exactly. So if we look at sort of his ancestry of David, what qualities would his character perhaps inherit, do you think? Based on these ancestors, what qualities do you think?
I would think initiative.
Initiative.
And boldness. Doing what's right. And in Nakshon's case, doing what God would have commanded. So,
okay. Anything else? Any other qualities you think David might have inherited from his lineage? It's your opinion, Pamela.
Sexy guy.
Wait, Pamela. What?
Leadership.
Okay.
Ingenuity, cleverness, right? Because on the matrilineal side, they were conniving and manipulative, and that can be used for good or bad. But
okay, so conniving, definitely conniving, manipulative, and expedience. In other words, I do what I need to do to get what I want, or to get what I need to get. Okay.
So pragmatism in a way.
Pragmatism. Anything else in his quality character that you notice already? Penina? You're muted. You're muted.
He was very, very brave. Don't forget that he fought Goliath.
Yeah, what we're talking about before we see anything about him, what he would have been.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Also, I don't know if this is something that you inherit or something that you learned, that he was chosen because he also was a shepherd.
Okay, so we'll find that out, that he was a caretaker.
Somebody who really cared for the animals and cared for his people. After all, he went to, yeah.
Also, as I said, nobody mentions strong sexuality. He had a lot of women. He had a very high libido.
I said that.
Yes, so he was, so women, he loved women. It seemed like he loved women.
But the women was also gutsy. That's what I'm trying to say.
The women were gutsy. He liked gutsy women.
Right.
Yes, he did like gutsy women, and he mistreated passive women, because we see how he treated Michal. He was terrible to her. So we'll see that. So this is, a sense of this. He's interesting. And also what we haven't seen, and I don't see it anywhere in his heritage, but he was a musician, and a poet as well. And we'll learn about
Psalms,
that.
all the Psalms.
All the Psalms, that he played the lyre, and, he was, he was a very colorful, interesting person. And I also find it, would you pick this person for his descendant to be the Messiah?
Yes.
You would?
Yes.
Why?
Because he's genuine. He's himself. He's just fearless and bold and brave and sexy and musical and just a communicator.
Okay, so if you say that, does this at all, because we know that it says Mashiach ben David, the Messiah will be a descendant of David. Does this change your idea of what kind of being the Messiah will be? He's descendant of David. What do you think of okay, where's anybody of the sisterhood have any comments that you want to make over there? Anybody? No? What kind of what will the Messiah be like if he's Ben David? I mean, we think of, I'm going to call on all of you in a minute. We kind of, even though we're Jews, we kind of think of Jesus, gentle, loving, whatever Christians say that's the Messiah. We say, well, our Messiah hasn't come yet, but it can't help but influence us about our image of what Messiah means. So Rebecca, go ahead.
Say charismatic, and that's definitely influenced by Jesus, because I think he supposedly was a fairly charismatic individual, and I would think to be a Messiah, you would have to have some kind of quality that would draw people to you to make them believe that you're a Messiah. Mm-hmm. How do someone believe you're a Messiah?
Right. So you have to be able to have charisma and magnetism and some kind of aura and you have to be attractive in some way, I think, whether it's physical, spiritual, emotional, or whatever. Pamela, you're so polite. You have your little hand up. You're not jumping in.
Well, I might otherwise, but so this is ever so slightly left of center, but I think it's interesting that there's this element of sexuality around David. And if you go to the Indian traditions, which I personally believe is sort of where the Christianity came from, Judaism via the East, Krishna was hugely sexual. He had multiple wives. They were having lots of babies. There was this huge element of sexuality to that. And he's the incarnation of whatever deity, I forget which one, and so forth and so on. So I think it's interesting, sort of in the pantheological perspective, that the sexual magnetism is a really prevalent element. It seems almost, universal or something. So just
that's very interesting. And the thing about David is he was sexual, but he was a lover. He loved lots of things. He had an appetite and a zest. We know he danced in Jerusalem down the streets when they brought the ark into the city. So he was a very enthusiastic liver and lover of life. Okay, who else wanted to speak? Anyone else besides Penina? Did anybody else have their hand up? Okay, Penina.
Okay.
No, you were already, you muted yourself.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the two things I would like to bring up. They say, first of all, regarding the Messiah, that he won't come unless there is going to be peace on earth.
Right.
So the whole idea of the Messiah is that people should learn how to be, first of all, to live in
Right.
peace with each other. So it's like, this is the quality, then David was like a peace seeker. And we also have one incident in his life that shows that he wasn't that mean, that he liked to be fair, kind of, and more like, to be fair. And that was when he bought Jerusalem. He was in a war with this nation that owned Jerusalem at the time. And he won from them so many things, and he took from them a lot of things, because in the war, it was taken whether things you wanted to or not.
Right. You took spoils of war. Right.
You destroy, and that's how it is. So the king wanted to give him Jerusalem, and he said, no, I took from you this and this and this. He said, I would like to buy it from you. And he was very fair to him, very, I would say, merciful.
Okay.
Like, you take even the place that you live in. He said, no, I would like to buy it from you. In other words, he wanted to show that it's not a take. It's more like a deal, like
Right.
like be fair. And the king sold it to him. That's why I always say that one day, maybe among all the archaeology, maybe we're going to find the deed,
Yeah. Okay, so now we have that. So now we need the backstory, because David was not, what's a king in Israel? Were there kings? We have a history of kings. If you think about us, we know we had prophets, we had leaders, we had judges. And then Samuel, who was also, his story starts with a very famous story of his mother, Hannah, and how she prayed to God at the sanctuary and asked for a son. And and the priest thought she was drunk because she was speaking, she was talking quietly to God, which usually in those years, in this ancient time, we're talking like 1000 BCE, no, even 1100 BCE, actually, between those two, you didn't pray, you sacrificed. There wasn't really this idea of prayer. The way that you connected with your God all over that part of the world was you sacrificed something. You gave up something, an animal or your best grain or fruits or whatever. This woman is in the sanctuary with her family, had just sacrificed. She has no children. It's our classic story that, classic birth story of like all our heroes seem to come from mothers who are barren, who have a problem. In David's case, we don't ever know who his mother was. But in any case, and she's talking to God, and the priest, Eli, says, you're drunk. What are you doing in here? And she says, I'm not drunk. I'm praying to God for a son. And Eli blesses her, and she ends up having Samuel, which means Shmuel, God heard me. And she devotes him to working in the temple, brings him back when he's a little boy, and he becomes one of the greatest prophets. And now we're coming to the story of why were there kings? He was a leader. He was a great leader, but he was getting old and people wanted to be like everyone else. That is the problem. So let's go to, I'm going to move this over here. All right. So I told you the story of Hannah. That's what happened. Now it's time for a king. So Cindy, you want to read? I know you have sunglasses. Is it too sunny there? I guess she's not hearing me. Cindy? No. Okay. Susan Ehrlich, you want to read?
Sure, but I can't read that small type. So
Pinch it out.
This is too, oh.
Print it out, but others might need it.
Hold on, I'll make it much bigger.
I can read it if you want me to. I've got.
Hold on.
Read it. I printed it. So, but
Okay.
When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn was Joel. And the name of his second was Abijah. And they served at Beersheba. But his sons didn't follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice.
It's so depressing to know that leaders have never changed. In politics, it's the same thing. They
Dirty,
took
corrupt.
bribes, they did whatever was expedient for them, they perverted justice. This is, 3,000 years ago, we're talking.
Mhm.
Same old, same old. Continue.
And they obviously didn't read all of the commandments, not just the 10.
Well, they read them, but they didn't follow them. A lot of people read them, but they don't follow.
Right. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You're old, and your sons don't follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have."
So it's like we need a king. This is very interesting to me because prophets, they have kind of spiritual power, but they don't have military power. They don't have physical power or whatever. And they're sort of saying, we want a dictator. They've become right wing. It's too loosey-goosey here. They do what they want. There's no one, they answer to nobody. They say, oh, they answer to God. No, we want a right wing. I think it's kind of right wing. we want a absolute ruler, a divine, an absolute ruler. Okay.
Not necessarily, because there was a lot of warfare, and anarchy isn't good either.
No, they wanted a military leader, but they wanted a king to make the final decision. Luckily, in Judaism, there are a lot of rules for kings, that you're not supposed to. But our kings historically didn't listen to them at all. They were like every king everywhere. Okay, continue.
But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king."
Okay, I want to stop and point out, I've talked about this before, but I just love it so much. The prophets, especially the early prophets, like the stories of Joshua, Judges, and the Kings and Samuel, are written by what we call the Deuteronomy school. They also wrote the book of Deuteronomy. And they're such fabulous writers. They write about the psychology of the people. They write about their feelings. They write about their fears, their anxieties, which the Torah has none of that. It's anger, frustration, or I don't know, punishment. It's more primitive in its range of recognizing human emotions because it's a much, much older text. It wasn't written that way. But look at this incredible insight. They haven't rejected you. They've rejected me. God is like a psychologist here. I love it that the writer understood through God Samuel's feelings. So it's like his shrink saying, okay, let's analyze this. It's really not about you. Okay, continue, Susan.
Very good. As they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they're doing to you.
Okay, so they've never really done the right thing. It's amazing that God kept us. Keep going.
Now listen to that, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights.
Okay, so now, and this is also in the Torah about what a king shouldn't do. They say he shouldn't have too many wives. He shouldn't have too many horses. He should actually, it says in the Torah, keep a copy of the Torah with him to consult. He needs. So it's like he's saying, but they're like everybody else, but just warn them what is a king? Okay, so what is a king? Okay, so this is what they said. This is what a king will do. And let's see if this has changed. What do you think about it? So Bonnie, do you want to read? Nice to have you. Bonnie is in Ohio, right?
Cleveland, Ohio, and a member of 22 years of this fabulous synagogue. So I'm thrilled to be part of this group.
Okay, why don't you read?
Okay, Samuel told all of the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots." Do we keep going?
Okay, so what will he do with your sons, basically? What will he do?
Serve them.
What, Ruth?
They'll have to,
But you keep turning yourself off. You're muted now, Ruth. Try it again. Unmute yourself. Press the little.
there we go. There we go.
Okay, go ahead.
It keeps giving me pages. They will serve him in one or another capacity. They will all be his servants, either running his armies for him or being street sweepers. They will all be subservient to him.
Yeah, they'll be your servants. Your sons will work for me, and they'll have to be his farmers. He'll take your harvest. He'll send them to war. Okay, and then what about the daughters, Bonnie?
Okay, he will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Let me keep going.
Yeah.
Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. Wow.
Okay, and I just want to go to this, and then we're going to talk about, but the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like other nations with a king to lead us and go out before us and fight our battles. So why do they want a king, do you think? And why do you think they want a king? Risa, what do you think? Risa.
It's easier to have someone make the decisions for you.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons. I think you're right. Okay. Any other reasons? Why do they want a king? Pamela.
They needed a leader. No.
They needed a leader. Okay. Is that what you said? Wait, you're muted, Pamela.
I said that, Doris.
That's what Doris said.
Oh,
Doris.
Doris. You can see Doris.
So
At me.
I don't know if you can see me. I'm out in the edge.
Yes. They needed a leader. Good. Okay.
So what I was thinking is that it's almost like a parental figure, but it's more than that, because you want someone who's going to fight your battles. But in a way, what they're saying was we want to be like everybody else. So it's an interesting assimilation, right? Everybody else has this, governmental structure. We want to have that too. We don't want to be fractured, if you will, because otherwise they don't feel as strong and maybe is able to defend themselves. So I think there's a little practicality to it, as opposed to being a bunch of individual groups where you're all your own sort of mini fiefdom. You want one big one. But I think it's also sort of interesting that the way this was conceived, like this is the only result of what could be. That like a king could only be these things like everybody else. That there was kind of almost a narrow interpretation of what it meant to be a king.
Well, and he would rule you and take taxes from you and take your possessions and take the best. Can you imagine now, after thousands of years of kings, that the United States, these colonies said, we don't want a king? What a radical, I was just thinking, what a radical idea these colonists had. It was unheard of anywhere in the world. We don't need a king. we're going to rule ourselves. Are you crazy? What? That's insane. I mean, we take it for granted, but it was quite phenomenal and a huge kind of cultural or intellectual developmental leap in thinking to think that way. And I just thought of it right now, because really them wanting to be like everybody else, up until this time, the Israelites were not. Things were not going well. Their leaders were not great, but they were self-governing. They didn't have a constitution. They had the Torah, but they didn't all know it or whatever. But it's really interesting to think the opposite as well. Rebecca.
I just learned this recently, and it's not my idea, it's the teacher's idea. And what he said, what makes a nation are people, land, and government. So you could consider, I guess, a king a government, a type of government.
It is a type of government, but what I'm saying is when the United States decided to create a new kind of government, it was radical in its time. In the 1700s, there was no such thing. Risa, yes.
It's going on today. As we're watching what's been going on with the Queen being followed by the King, he doesn't have the full support of the people. They've about had it with kings and queens and the money that's being spent and their lack of a democracy. And it's repeating itself now. A king can be good, but a king can overdo it. And so they're beginning to quietly rebel. I don't know if they're ever going to get rid of the monarchy, but it has not been all positive. And
Well,
that's what the Israelites were afraid of, is that it might get to be too big, but we need it.
we need it.
Everything you're saying, everything that you want to be like the other people, but to rebel against it makes very good sense to me.
Right, but today and not but.
For the United States to start, what I'm trying to say is the United States did that.
They thought of it before anyone, maybe since the time of these, like this is ancient Israelite time where there wasn't a king and they said, we want a king like everyone else. But then they saw what kings could do over the centuries and centuries, and they're quite horrible. Henry VIII, and they're constantly killing and converting and whatever. So anyway, so they said, we want a king. We want to be like everybody else. Okay, Penina. You're muted. You're muted.
Okay. We are leaving something in between. David
Yes.
was not the first king. Saul was the first king.
I know we're about to talk about Saul.
Right. What I'm trying to say is that transformation was not from total chaos to all of a sudden wanting a king because of it. They had judges, and they were doing very well with the judges. Sometimes there were wars with other nations with the judges, but so they did with the kings. They had judges, but still it was a autocratic society. It's the priests that were in charge, actually.
Exactly. So it was a theocratic. Yes.
But yes, and the tribes, they had some tribes had, each tribe actually had their own judge, and the judges themselves, but there was always the one that was kind of like controlling the scene at the time.
But it seems like judges arose when needed. There were elders. Here's the elders.
So what happened was that Samson came along.
Right.
And Samson was a disaster, and he loved the Philistine. By the way, there is an author by the name of Jabotinsky who wrote 2 books. One was The Man of Nazareth about Jesus, and one of them was about Samson. He wrote a book, Samson. And the book says that Hannah also, she was barren. And she went out to the fields to ask for a son. And then she came home, and all of a sudden she had an angel. Jabotinsky thought that a Philistine man actually raped her.
Okay, so this is totally off the topic.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say, he had a big attraction to the Philistine. He married the Philistine.
I know, but this is not the point.
We know the story. It was a disaster. They were fighting, and the Philistine destroyed the Israelites. And
they wanted a leader.
And the priest at the time apparently wasn't strong enough to take him out of this mess. So now they want something else. And Samuel is telling them, you don't know what you're asking for. He's telling them, you're gonna find out that you might be.
Okay, Penina, stop.
We have now that the whole autocracy to monarchy.
Okay, we just read it. Penina, I want to stop you because we only have a few more minutes. I want to go back to the text. You're absolutely correct. That's what he just said. You don't know what you're asking for. Okay, so they said, we want a king. And now this is the king they chose. Saul, according to the text with God's help, chose Saul. Now, the interesting about Saul, when we read about him, the thing that made him stand out is he was very tall. He was tall and he was handsome and he looked kingly, but he wasn't very kingly as a person. He was insecure. He had issues. He actually started to have mental issues, but I sometimes think Samuel drove him to such because he didn't listen and he didn't. And then I'm not going to read this whole thing. I sent it to you, but God told him to destroy the Amalekites in a battle. Well, Samuel told him that God said it, and he didn't destroy the king, and he didn't destroy everyone. And Samuel said, you didn't listen to what God said or what I said. And he decides that Saul is not the right person to be king. You're too big for your britches. You're not listening to me. And Samuel says right here, although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission saying, go and completely destroy these wicked people, the Amalekites, wage war against them until you've wiped them out. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? And Saul says, I did do it. I just brought back their king and I gave the most of it to God and let my soldiers take some booty. And Samuel says, it's more important. He gives him this curse, basically, right here. He gives him this curse. And he says, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as obeying? To obey is better than sacrifice. To heed is better than the fat of the rams. I actually have my own opinion that he was mad because Saul didn't listen to him, because Samuel was feeling, I can't control you anymore. And you're going off and doing, because what Saul did objectively was not terrible. He divided some of the booty among his army who had been fighting and were hungry and whatever, and then sacrificed the best to God. But it wasn't what Samuel wanted. This is my opinion. And Saul then says, I feel Saul had the best of intentions. And he says, Samuel says, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. And Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I have violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men and I gave in to them. I beg you, forgive my sin and come back with me that I may worship the Lord. And Samuel said, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king. And he actually says right here, as Samuel turned to leave, Saul called hold of the hem of his robe and it tore. He was so worried. Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you. He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he's not a human being that he should change his mind. And so basically, this is why I suspect Samuel, because he hadn't even picked David yet. And you're already saying God has chose someone else, but he hadn't picked David yet. So I know, Penina, you're not going to agree with me because Penina loves, you agree with me? Okay. All right. So I think
there was a reason. Okay. In the meantime, they had wars and David was already under the king's wing, kind of.
No, he hadn't been even discovered yet. Not at this point in the text.
At the point where he was chosen, it's when they came back from war and the women were singing, that Saul was killing only by the hundreds or whatever.
Yeah, but that's
David is
later.
killing by blah, 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 blah. They
No.
loved him.
He's still 17 years old. He's a little boy.
Oh,
No
I
one
see.
ever heard of
Before he
him.
kills- okay.
He's no one. But Samuel is saying, you're not the right one. I think because you're not listening to me enough. You're not. I'm supposed to be the king, the power behind the throne. I'm supposed to be the power behind the throne. You're supposed to, follow me, which Saul did. But Saul grew into his kingship and started to make decisions for himself. There's a very, very famous tale that we're not reading about in Saul, where there was a war and he took two bulls and he cut them into 6 each, and he sent them all to the tribes and said, when you get this, come back and we have to fight together. He was a pretty good uniting force, but he had a fragile mental state. Saul was a fragilely, there's a section earlier on where these this group of prophets are singing and in ecstasy, and Saul starts dancing around with them. So he was he was a strong man physically. He tried to be a good leader, but he was very fragile mentally, emotionally, and insecure. And Samuel basically broke him down, I feel. He broke him down until he had a nervous breakdown. He lost his mind, ultimately, became paranoid. So we know he made him unfit to be a king. And I also think he had a fantasy by picking this young boy, David, he would have more control. He didn't live that long. But, David, you pick a 17, 18-year-old kid and say, you're king. The kid's going to say, well, tell me what to do, And so this is my psychological evaluation of Samuel. He had been the boss in charge for so long. It's like, what's his name? Cardinal Wolsey kind of controlled Henry VIII. When you think about it, these people behind the throne, behind them, who give them all the advice and guide them and whatever. And then when you start to lose your power, it's very upsetting. And Samuel had the voice of God behind him as well. And he basically told Saul, you're out. And though it wasn't immediate, but psychologically, it started to weigh on Saul and weigh on him and make him worried and insecure and nervous, because he was king for a number of years after this. But David was now creeping onto the scene. So we just have a few more minutes, but I want to introduce you to David, because we're watching now who he is. And one of the things I'm going to point out to you, which I found interesting, share this, was, okay, we're going to get off of this stuff.
Before you get through with Saul, because I think your analysis, I think it was really good. And we know he went, and I guess the interaction with Samuel being somewhat bitter and again, losing some power to Saul. But I think Saul's an interesting character. When you said he danced with the prophets, didn't he go naked like they did too, which when they were all in a trance?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, because I remember our discussion once before, and Talia thought it was good, or
that was a good thing.
Yeah, that he had some spirit. But I thought, oh, he's dancing naked. And then the other thing, his characteristics in the beginning, he was good looking. He had a good set of good set of hair, but he hid behind the baggage. If you remember, he didn't want to be.
That's right. He hid. He didn't want to be king. He was out looking for his father's lost donkeys.
That's right.
He was a donkey driver.
Donkey.
Right. And then he actually grew into it. But then here at the very end, before Saul finds David, Samuel finds David, he curses him. He curses him, which is so sad. And he says, as your sword
made
women. Who wants to read this? Somebody read this. Pam, why don't you read it? Pamela. Samuel said this curse.
But Samuel said, as your sword has made women childless, so will your mother be childless among women. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Oh, that
And
was
Samuel
the
put
king.
Agag
That
to
was
death
the king.
before the Lord.
Yeah, yeah. But this part, Samuel left for Ramah.
Oh, sorry. Samuel left for Ramah, but Saul went up to his home in Gibeah
Yeah.
of Saul until the day Samuel died. He did not go see Saul again, though Samuel mourned for him. And the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel.
Yeah, well, says who. But anyway.
It's also interesting. I think this was well put. Saul did see Samuel again from the witch of Endor. And
Well, that's later. What happens is right before he dies,
he died.
he's about to die in battle and he's completely overwhelmed. It's forbidden in the Torah to have a witch. He calls a witch, and the witch brings up Samuel back to life from the next world. And Samuel says to Saul, what do you want from me? And he says, help me, help me. He says, it's too late. You're going to die. Your son's going to die. You know, you're cursed. And you should have never brought me up again. And he disappears. So Saul even believes in witchcraft in the end. So now we have, okay, wait, I want to find this.
Does anybody know when syphilis was invented or came into being as a disease?
Syphilis?
Yeah,
I'm
because
sure
if you
it's always been there.
Well, doesn't it kind of sound like the king had syphilis or something? that there was like a disease that kind of made him go bonkers. Like if you remember the movie Madness of King George about King George III, some of this kind of sounds like that. I don't know. I mean, in terms of like some medical condition, an actual like medical condition.
Okay, I think you could be right. That's interesting. You could be a medical condition or psychological, but I wanted to just see this because we're just about to close and we're going to continue and do the whole David thing. But I wanted you to say that Jesse had 7 sons passed before Samuel, and he had 8 sons total, but the first 7 were not the right ones to be picked to be the next king. And I like this idea that earlier with Ruth, you said, he loved you more than 7 sons. Here we have 7 sons, and then David is the 8th son. So I think that's interesting that we're talking about 7 sons not being enough, but the 8th is the one who's chosen, and that's who that's going to be the next king. And this is when he starts to look for, I don't want to start now, but this is where he finds David for the first time. And David actually goes to work for Saul, because at this point, Saul is so depressed. Yes, Donna, I'm going to call on you in 1 second. That David plays music for him. It's a psychology to keep him calm and helps him with his anxiety. Donna, yes.
I was going to say that David was made fun of by his brothers as he tended the sheep. He played his harp. He was a musician, and that's exactly what you're talking about with Saul. It soothes his insanity. The music soothed, the harp soothed Saul's jealousy and insanity.
That's right. We're going to read about that next week. So I just wanted to start with some background on David, on his character, on his women, on his ancestry. Cindy, did you have your hand up?
Oh, I just wanted to say, and there was a comment in the chat about syphilis. There was no remedy for it until Dr. Ehrlich developed his, what was it, Sarazin with some number on it? And
any relation to you?
Yeah, I was hoping. But I know, actually.
You're right. Yes, it was. People wouldn't know it. People wouldn't know that that's what would drive you crazy or whatever.
Right.
So this is our first session on getting the idea of David. In the next one, we're going to see more of his character. He goes to work for King Saul. He slays Goliath, and then he marries his first wife, Michal, which is, or is it Merab? Does he get both of them, Nina? I have to take a look.
He gets
Michal. And everybody who's married to David is in love with him. He's not always in love with them. And he doesn't always treat them the best, but they're all in love with him. So he was one of those. And actually, in his young days, he was a bad boy. He would have been one of a very charismatic bad boy. And he had a gang that he hung out with that, went around and hired themselves out. Yes, Penina.
Okay, I'm going back to the fact that Samuel resented whatever was going on with Saul again because he was afraid for his own authority.
Right.
Because like I said before, the whole idea would happen there at that moment where they chose a king. It was the transformation from the priest or the Kohanim
Right.
controlling the sin or the king.
Right.
There wouldn't be both, but the king was allowed to do whatever he wanted to do when it came to other nations. So that was the real fear here with Samuel, that Saul did not listen and did things his own way and not necessarily even things that were followed the Hebrew God or the God of Israel. So the thing is that, again, it's the fear for his own authority.
I agree with you.
That's why when we say that this was a very crucial historical moment, it's that transformation from autocracy to monarchy.
That's right.
And then David did listen to them. When I remember when
No, he didn't. He didn't.
Well, the prophets.
David didn't listen. We'll talk about him. He broke so many laws. It's unbelievable.
Okay.
But he was so charming, and he would recognize it. Anyway, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, but the prophets were more taking over. Here, there was the priests themselves, the Kohanim, that were the fear for their authority. That's, I think, what was the whole thing here. That's it.
Okay, so Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
By the way, this Friday night is Shabbat Sukkot, and there's dinner if you want to join. And then there's a fantastic sisterhood lunch in the Sukkah this Sunday with wonderful speakers, both having to be related to Risa Davids. But it's about, yes, they're going to be talking about sort of the situation of women and the way that the Jewish women organizations are dealing with crises of women around the world. Isn't that right, Risa?
Yeah, she's talking about social justice, Shoshana, and then Aviva is talking about her experience in Rwanda, where she was involved with a group of surgeons who were volunteering there.
That's going to be really interesting. It's outside in the Ermis courtyard at the Ermis campus. It's beautiful. Last year we had 80 women. It was a wonderful afternoon, and we hope you'll join us. Yes,
I already bought my ticket.
Stacy?
Rabbi, will you be back doing this now every week?
Every other week. Every other week.
Are you? But next week Stanley is not doing it.
I do know that.
Okay.
But I will see you all in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Have a wonderful week, everyone. Hope to see people Friday night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Should we leave this out?
Thanks.